On today's episode of Taking 5, we have Steve Robinson from Barstool Sports. He's the producer of the Kirk Minihane Show, which is a super popular podcast, peaked at like number 3 or 4 on iTunes and Apple Music and all that, or Apple Podcasts and all those fun platforms. Really cool conversation with him. We talk about how he went from political theory major in college to working in radio to eventually producing a podcast and how he's been able to make a living from it. And the cool thing is that they record that podcast at Red 13 Studios, which is where, if you haven't heard by now, I have been working recently. Sort of what inspired me to start this podcast, actually. So really excited to have Steve on. We have some great conversations with him. You'll notice that we're starting off this interview with me talking instead of just jumping right into the interview. Never fear. We're still gonna keep that format. I still once I end my little spiel here, we're still gonna have those few seconds of fucking around because I think it sounds cool, and I think it's interesting. But if you disagree, let me know. And what is that music? Oh, wow, that's pretty professional right there. Stay tuned. We got Steve coming up right after this. Oh, Steve, you're very loud.
Me.
Wait, say something again, Steve.
Mic check 1, 2.
Oh, actually, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Me.
This is a very sensitive mic.
That is very.
You can be off it a little bit.
That's true.
Me.
All right, thanks, Kate. That's quite enough of that. All right, so
Quite enough of that.
we're here. We're back. We didn't go for long. We're back with Taking 5. That's the name. Also,
Taking
Taking 5.
Taking
Okay,
5.
I like it.
It was Take 5 for like 3 weeks, and then we realized...
Isn't Take 5 a candy bar?
Most
So I've had different reactions when I've told people. And one, when I told my girlfriend, her first reaction was like, I don't like it. And I was like, why? And she was like, well, it's a candy bar.
Yeah.
I was like...
It's a good candy bar.
But like, I
It's
don't
a good
know.
candy bar.
It is. I honestly don't think I've ever even had.
I think it's
I
kind of
don't
like
think I've had
it's
one.
kind of like a Reese's Pieces.
I think, is it
Except for in bar shape, more shaped like a Snickers. I think
I will say
might be a little
Reese's
wafer in there. Yeah.
Is Reese's in bar shape? That is
honestly
great.
the dream.
Well, I mean, I think the Easter egg Reese's Pieces is the best.
Oh,
right.
For
It's got the solid peanut butter to chocolate
For
ratio. You
sure.
can't argue with that.
I'm Jewish.
Oh, goodbye.
So you can't eat candy?
No, I can't.
Serious?
Facts.
Okay,
True.
so we
He
have
just wanted to say
we
it.
have a different type of guest in today, but a really cool guest that I'm very excited about.
Woo!
This
All
is
our guests are cool.
Steve, yeah, that's true, but this one's cooler.
True.
We have Steve Robinson in studio. Say hi, Steve.
Hi.
That's Steve right here. So Steve is actually taking on a role that he is not as accustomed to as normal. Normally, he is the producer of these types of things.
Yes.
And I won't pretend that he didn't help me set it up, and he probably is also going to help me check the levels afterwards and things like that. But Steve and I have been hanging out for what seems like years, but is really only probably a couple months.
We've been here at Red 13 creating the Kirk Minihane Show since the end of June.
End of June. Yeah, wow. So it has been.
And then there was that whole
basically-
month that I took off to go to Europe.
That's true. We don't have to talk about that, though. Oh, yeah. See, let's talk
there's some gaps.
Yeah, so Steve, so Steve has like
I relate.
Kate does relate. Kate's about to leave for Florence to go abroad because she's a child.
Oh, wow.
No, she's not a child. Well, legally you are.
Thanks, Josh, for bringing that up yet again. I really enjoy hearing
When's
about
your birthday again?
October 1st.
Nice. She's gonna be 21
I'm
in
so
October.
close. I'm so mother.
Well, the great thing is in
close.
Europe, it doesn't matter.
Right?
That's true. So basically
Right.
you turn 21 in 2 weeks when you leave. Or 3
You
weeks.
right. Three. But you're right. But at the same time, I'm not going to be able to celebrate my 21st birthday like the way
That's true.
Americans celebrate.
'Cause you're
It's
gonna
overrated. It's overrated.
It is.
But I still want to partake in that American culture. You know?
That's
it's a
true.
good experience. I'll just do it when I get back. It's fine. But anyways, proceeding on.
I believe in you. We get distracted a lot. Also, you should probably know that going in. Not that you're not used to it. So Steve, I'm a little iffy on Steve's background, which is why I'm excited to have him in. But currently, he produces the Kirk Minihane Show, which I think peaked Did it peak at number 1 in the sports podcast, or peaked like?
Yeah, it did.
It did. It was number 1 for a little bit.
It's been a very, very popular podcast, and Kirk obviously was number 1 Boston Morning Drive Radio for a little while. And then, there's some corporate drama, and he got kicked out of there. But I think all of us are really happy to be at Barstool. It's a fantastic company.
It definitely seems...
Yeah, corporate drama.
Seems like a match made in heaven in terms of Kirk and Barstool.
It really does. And they let us do our own thing. We're here. We kind of run it. We're like our own little business running under the umbrella of Barstool, and they get their money, we get our money, everybody's happy.
It's super cool.
Everyone's
So
happy.
basically my background with Steve, so I've obviously been working here at Red 13 Studios.
Shout out.
Red
Shout
13
out.
Studios.
Red 13
and
Studios.
I guess basically the week before you guys, I think you'd already recorded the first week sort of trial period of episodes.
Yeah.
And then they were they record early in the morning from 7 to 9 because Kirk's insane and loves just being up that early.
Well, we also, he's used to being up because he did
That's
the
true,
morning
he did
drive show.
radio.
I think this is actually later for him.
Oh, really?
He gets up at
That's
3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning anyways.
Are
but
you kidding?
Well, for years he was doing morning drive radio, so you're on air at 6.
He's just used
So
Yeah, you're right.
so you've got to have
I
some
could
prep
never do
time.
it.
You can't just wake up and then jump into the radio. You gotta have some
Right.
time for your brain to wake up when you're doing it early in the morning.
Facts.
That's true.
I was about to say, if I had to do a podcast that early, I would probably be the most uninteresting person. I don't wake up, my mind doesn't wake up until at least 8 a.m.
I do feel like I actually like recording in the mornings versus the late afternoons. There was one podcast we did where we had to do it in 2 segments, and the second half we were doing it 4, and it'd been a whole day, and I was just kind of I didn't have the same verbal energy that I feel like I
Yeah,
have at the
I
beginning of the
feel
day.
like I gave it my all in the morning, and then I was kind of half-mast
Yeah,
at the end of the day.
that's fair.
It's-
Either way,
Anyways,
some people are
moving
morning, some
along.
people are night. So hopefully we'll actually get to the good stuff. We spent on our last or 2 interviews ago, we literally spent
Oh my god.
it was an hour and 20 minutes, and the first hour was just on high school for this kid who's a singer, and he's my age, he's 24.
So what's the theme of the podcast?
So the theme of this podcast.
Take it away, Josh
So,
Brown.
I got the elevator
It's
pitch
his
down.
spiel.
It's my spiel. We are interviewing basically people in some sort of creative industry. So it's been a lot of obviously musicians, music producers, things like that. But I want to expand it to writers, podcasters, podcast producers, obviously, which is why I have you, and authors, artists, anyone who's in a creative. Maybe.
So basically people who aren't working at Fidelity or
yes.
working insurance jobs.
Yes,
or something
exactly.
like that.
In honor of what I
Creatives.
probably should.
The creative
Yeah.
type. See, you have to
Creatives.
squint a little bit when you say creative type.
Creative.
Exactly.
Just a
Well,
little
nasal.
bit better than the people who have to punch a time card. Just a little bit better.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of just showing that, hey, these aren't necessarily people that you've heard of, but these are people who are making a living doing something cool and
Silly
something
stuff.
artistic. And yeah, people who are making a living
I get
recording
paid,
people.
I get paid to produce a show that makes dick jokes.
Exactly,
all the time,
all
you
day.
know?
And I think
So
a
you're
lot of
living the
people,
dream.
Yes.
honestly, a lot of people would probably consider that living the dream. It's
true.
So anyway, Steve produces the Kirk Minihane Show. Go check it out. It's one of the most popular sports podcasts right now. It's produced by Barstool Sports. Yep. Maybe you've heard of them. So Steve, you're a Barstool employee.
Yes, I am.
As of 2 weeks ago.
I am. I am a Barstool employee.
Right. And the reason I know Steve is because, as I said before, I've been coming in and helping them set up the podcast. At first, I'd say I was helping you set up the podcast, set up the equipment in the studio because he wasn't as familiar with it. Now I pretty much just let you in the door.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it. It's fine. You're always on time. It's good.
That's true. That's
Josh
true.
has been eliminated from the occasion.
Yeah, I was slowly phased out.
It was funny when we first came to Red 13 because talking with Jim, I don't really think that the music world that he's big in and the sports world that Kirk Minihane is big in have much overlap traditionally. So I don't think Jim really knew what was going on. And then after the first 2 weeks of podcasting, when he was getting a tremendous response from people because Kirk was saying, hey, we're here at Red 13 Studios,
exactly.
and he was seeing the charts, he was listening to the podcast as well, and he was like, oh, okay, so this is what we've hooked into.
Right.
And so now I think there's some kind of a mutual understanding. It's been great. We've loved Red 13 Studios. I think we're probably the first podcast that's come
absolutely.
in here, and it's been great. You guys should definitely do more podcasting.
Though that's one of the things, as soon as this happened and we started recording you guys, after a week I was like, why aren't we doing all of that? Why are we doing this all the time?
Yeah,
There's
you guys
so
should have
many
your
people.
own. I don't know if this is a Red 13 podcast, but you should have your own Red 13 podcast. All your creators should be doing
this
it.
Is separate. This is a separate
Yeah.
one.
This
We're
is
definitely
this is like a cousin.
Little Skunk Works
a
operation.
little
yeah.
cousin to Red 13.
But
sponsored by Red 13 in terms of their just letting us use the
Equipment,
studio.
time.
Well, hey, I mean, it's
Love and devotion.
it's a growth industry, and just like there are a lot of aspiring musicians who need a space to record, there's a lot of aspiring podcasters who need a space to record.
And
so.
you are sitting with two right now.
Future titans in the industry.
Okay, so first off, how are we doing? How's the podcast going?
I think
What do you
it's great.
You think it's good?
Very, very natural conversation. It's lively.
Christ.
I mean, are we going to look at our phones?
Little did you know, Kate and I.
I was about to take a little social media, but I.
Oh, Kate just
I can
got
wait.
called out.
I can
will
wait.
say we are. No, I'm kidding.
Oh my god! Now I feel so millennial right now.
Well, I was going to say we are millennials in the fact that all of my notes are on my phone. And the
Well,
notes
I mean, notes on the phone are fine, but
yeah.
I've been, and I'm just kidding, but I've been in some interviews with people who are very famous.
Ooh.
And they just
We
want
don't
to
do
stare at
name
their
drop.
fucking phone the entire time, and they can't give you the time of the day. Like, well, I mean, maybe they're not famous, but they think they're a big deal. So they're
Right.
like, they're having another conversation, and you're in the middle of a live show, and they're like, I got a call from my assistant. Do you mind if I take this? Or they're just like sending text messages. Like, it's like, come on, I know you're a big deal, but just like, let's go. A little bit of focus
Well,
here. It's like
if it-
5 minutes of your attention
If it
could
makes
go
you
a
feel
long way
better,
here.
I consider you more celebrity than I am. So therefore,
I hope that.
therefore, I feel like it's not really a disrespect thing because you're already higher up.
I think she's saying you have all the power in this equation.
All right,
That's why I felt a little scolded. I was like, oh my god.
This would be the first time.
Yeah, I know.
I was like a professional in the podcast industry just called me out on my actions during the podcast. I am ashamed.
No, this is good. We're taking notes. This is basically just learning for us. Steve's
Yeah,
taking
no,
us
it's
to
good. I mean,
podcasting school.
that's the only way to learn. You know, there's, I guess for people in my generation, I guess we're the same generation, but people my age, people I went to college with, there's always this conversation about grad school. Are you going to go to grad school? But I've learned more by just jumping kind of headfirst into the broadcasting industry than I ever could have learned. I mean, what am I going to do going to grad school? I think doing it is the way that you're going to learn.
Right.
And so like you could go read podcasting 101 on some website or but I mean, you can just do it.
If you just
and
do it.
learn through experience.
Yeah.
I mean, and that applies to everything, I think.
So that's actually like a good segue.
I was thinking the same thing.
Josh,
And it's
save-
good. We need natural segues, otherwise we'll never get to what we're talking about.
I like how you pointed out the natural segue because
Yes.
now it's not a natural segue,
Oh,
and
it's
now
almost-
it's a segue.
Okay, you know what?
It's almost like we kind of just teed it up.
You
Hey,
know,
shoot-
volley.
shoot your
boom.
shot, Kate.
All right, shoot my shot. So, can you talk to us about how you first when did you kind of figure out you wanted to go into broadcasting or like be in that world? Like, when did that kind of click for you? Were you into other stuff beforehand? Like, tell us a little bit like your start. You know?
Okay, so it's actually a pretty cool story. I worked in Washington, D.C. for a little while, was always in political stuff, worked at a book publisher, did some various political things around there. Decided I want to come back to Maine. Came back to Maine and worked at a free market think tank, like evil right-wing think tank. And I did some like blogging and reporting for them and wrote policy papers like go charter schools, low taxes, boo, minimum wage. And I did a radio here and there on the side for the Portland, Maine station, WGAN. It was just a weekend show, 2 hours here, 4 hours there. Maybe I did that like 4 or 5 times, and it was just boring, dry stuff. Have like, you know, the Center for Nursing Home president in to talk about how Medicaid policy is going to impact, you know, reimbursement rates. Yeah,
Wow.
It was called Inside Maine. But that was my first taste of it.
I mean,
And so-
interesting, but like you're kind of doing cooler stuff.
It was just nerd shit. Yeah, no, I was just like straight
Nerd
nerd shit for the first like 3 or 4 years, maybe still. But so the morning guys on that station, Ken and Mike, came up on 10 years together. It's their 10-year anniversary doing the morning show together. Very popular morning show in the Portland metropolitan area, and the station wanted to celebrate that by having a roast of Ken and Mike.
Okay.
And the station manager called me and asked if I would MC the roast, and so I agreed to. And I don't know what they had in mind, but as soon as I heard the word roast, I was like, oh yeah. I'm fucking
Sign
in.
me up.
And so I'm sitting there watching, I probably watched every YouTube video of the Comedy Central roast that have ever
Those
been
are
up.
so
And I was
good.
like, so I know what I got to do. I got to come in here with prepared material to make fun of fucking everybody.
Yeah.
I just got to have canned lines to just rip everybody. So I spent like a lot of my spare time working on my jokes, my lines, crafting my material, just treated it like a stand-up act. And so the night comes, and the former governor of Maine is there, John Baldacci. Former governor, current senator Angus King was there by teleconference. The mayor of Portland was there. And there were a bunch of other kind of local people you guys wouldn't know, but it was a pretty well-known cast of people.
Yeah.
And there are maybe 350 people there.
That's a
and
lot.
the celebrity roaster was Howie Carr, the
Right.
Boston area broadcaster.
Yeah.
He's been on the radio for 25 years, just a Boston Herald columnist,
Yeah.
author, New York Times best-selling author of
Shout out
Brothers
Howie Carr.
Bulger. Just
Come-
fucking
Howie.
Shout out.
amazing, legendary
Come on the podcast,
career.
Howie.
And
Yeah. Hey, Howie, how you
We
doing?
are. This is your informal invitation.
Come
the
on
podcast.
over. Come on down.
we'll see what we could do. But anyways, I do my stand-up jokes. I rip everybody. Everything was landing that night. I don't know. The beer was being served pretty freely.
That-
it wasn't
that
like
helps.
wasn't like these.
Alcohol. I was about
Yeah.
to say alcohol always helps.
Well, that helps both
Yeah.
you and the audience appreciate the
Exactly.
humor
It wasn't.
more,
It wasn't like these $8 Red Sox beers. I'm pretty sure it was like $2 for a Sam Adams.
straight
soda.
Red
Facts.
Sox are like it's $11 for a Bud Light.
Awful. It's awful. But so the crowd was well lubricated. The jokes were landing. Everything worked.
Lubricated?
And yeah.
You never heard that before?
I really enjoyed that. I'm gonna use that.
Yeah.
And the day after the roast, I get a call from Howie's wife, who is also kind of like his business manager, and she says, "Hey, we're going independent in a month. Do you want to come work for Howie Carr?" And I'd grown up listening to Howie, and all through middle school and high school, from riding around with my grandfather and my dad. Howie Carr's on, and it's conservative radio. That's the kind of thing we did. I was conservative, and so that was just like, wow, yeah. And so he had a job as a producer. Did I know anything about producing fucking radio? No. Had I ever touched an audio board? No. Had I ever pulled an audio clip or seen Adobe Audition? No. But I was in. Fuck it. We did it. And you just learned it on the job over a couple of years and got better at the on-air stuff, got better at the technical stuff, and ended up working with him for 5 years. And by the end of it, I was filling in for him and hosting a 4-hour radio show
Wow.
and a 2-hour TV show.
Wow.
So
And,
that
yeah.
that night that you spoke was like your Eminem lose yourself moment, basically.
Yeah,
where
it was.
You
I
know,
think,
like
I
Great
think about it a lot,
comparison.
and I guess the lesson that I've taken from it is, I was emceeing that thing for free. I don't even think I got paid for it, so I could have just mailed it in and just like asked guest after guest to come up.
Right.
But because of the time and energy I spent into doing something that could have been small but doing it really well,
Right.
it ended up being, I guess, a formative moment in my career.
sure. I mean, that
Yeah.
basically it certainly led you to here, which I have to imagine is the pinnacle of your career. Is this
Oh,
podcast,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
absolutely.
So if it weren't for that, you wouldn't be here. But in seriousness, if it weren't for that, you wouldn't have spent the last 5 years working for Howie Carr and building
No.
up this resume.
I did a live radio broadcast in the East Room of the White House and interviewed
Right.
alongside Howie, the
You were telling
president
me that.
of the United States. Yeah, I interviewed the vice president a number of times, had governors, senators.
Oh my God.
Some guy from the Brady Bunch.
Stop it.
Peter Brady.
Stop it.
I've never watched the Brady Bunch.
I know, I
neither
never
have
have.
I. But it's just
Oh, that's even
some
before.
people. Maybe
Third
this isn't the right
person-
crowd. Some people are like, "Oh my
yeah,
God,
yeah,
you met
yeah.
Peter fucking Brady?"
Right? Like
Wait.
if it's the right audience.
I haven't seen it either, but I just think it's cool because cultural icon, like Brady
Yeah,
Bunch.
yeah,
The fact that
yeah.
you even you don't really even need to watch the Brady Bunch to know it's
How many
that's
of them?
pretty
How many of
fucking
them
cool.
were there?
You know
Were
what?
there like 10, 12?
Dozens.
There's a lot.
There was
Yeah.
that Snickers commercial with them a few years back.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Well, they gotta be old now, right?
They are.
When was that show popular?
Yeah, he was young on the show and he's
Before
older
me.
now, but he does good charitable work now. He's actually he's a legit guy.
Like
He's,
a really
he's very
good guy.
nice. He's one of
That's
those
awesome.
he's one of those people who, you always hear these crazy stories about childhood actors like
Right.
Macaulay Culkin,
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
just
yeah.
a downward spiral of like sucking dick for crack.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
never works out.
Oh,
But
man.
Peter has actually Peter Brady. I forget what his real fucking name is. But
Peter Brady's fine.
Shout out Peter
He's
Brady.
definitely going by Peter Brady. Yeah, that's one of those typecast type people. It's like you're just
Yeah.
Peter Brady now.
But no, he's a great guy. He doesn't act like somebody who's been famous their entire life. Who
That's
you would
cool.
think.
Which is
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
best.
so you've interviewed a lot of different types of people, like famous, some semi-famous, locally famous, etc. Like, is it always the case? Because I feel like a lot of the times, and one thing I think is cool about podcasts, especially ones that get big enough that they get like celebrity guests, is like it gives you this avenue to be like, oh, like that's actually a really cool person. Like I would hang out with that person. But then sometimes it's like, I don't know if I like that person now that I hear them speak a little bit. I think more often than not, what happens is that they'll interview, like, obviously, so Barstool Podcast, I listen to Pardon My Take a lot, right? They'll have a ton
Yeah.
of different celebrities on, and I think, like, one of the first, there's this, like, very famous episode that they had with Joe Buck, because, like, Joe Buck
Yeah,
had
yeah,
this,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
bad reputation. For anyone who doesn't know, Joe Buck is a very popular sports commentator. If you got no Joe Buck, do you know Joe Buck?
I hope he's.
Do you know Joe Buck
I hope he's all right.
After you said that, no, I'm gonna feel really awkward
Kate
about
doesn't know who Joe
saying
Buck is.
no.
That's fine.
It's
I
fine.
mean, we don't watch
you know who
sports,
Joe
it's
Buck
fine.
is. He.
You probably recognize
You heard
him.
about his health trouble, right?
Oh no.
Yeah, he got addicted to hair plugs. No, I'm serious. Don't laugh at his. No,
Are you actually like?
no, he got addicted to hair plugs, and he was having so many procedures that he actually lost he
shit.
lost his voice for a little while.
Oh
Oh,
wow.
I feel bad.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell if you're.
No, I'm
if
dead
you're
serious.
I thought you were. I
No,
thought
I'm
you
dead
were
serious.
being sarcastic.
People at home can look it up. He
Wow.
had so many hair procedures that he lost his voice for a little while. He's fine now, I guess.
Oh,
but
great.
That was a weird thing. I didn't even know that
Damn.
could happen.
Yeah.
I feel like a.
Yeah,
Interesting.
you just
I
laughed.
just laughed
At
at
a fucking hair
at a
plug, a
man's
voiceless hair plug
I am
addict.
feeling a lot of things right now, and shame is one of them. But anyways, so Joe Buck had this reputation for years for being like this kind of like stiff, wasn't any fun, like.
Yeah.
And then he goes on Part of My Take, and he's just like a delight.
Yeah.
And then like it didn't like transform his career, but like it definitely like changed a lot of people's views of them, and I think that's really cool. So in your career, having interviewed all these different people, do you find that most people are pretty nice, pretty chill in person, or you interview people who you're like, I feel like this person might be kind of a dick, and then you leave and you're like, yeah, I was right.
Yeah, most
confirmed theory.
I would say that there are two kinds of guests.
Right.
There's the kind that is the same off air as they are on air,
Right.
where you don't really notice a difference. There's
Yeah.
there's not really like a shtick or an affect that they're putting on, or they're not gonna say something to express an opinion on air that they wouldn't off air, or vice versa. And then there are other people where it's definitely a shtick,
put on a
where
thing,
they're like a little cold and unresponsive, or maybe like big timing. I would say, without naming names, generally, media reporters, people who are in the business, people who are like political reporters, tend to think that they're a bigger deal than
Right.
maybe they are.
Yeah.
And so they're a little bit more like jealous of their time, and which is not a problem. I mean, everybody is jealous of their time, but they tend to, like, well, I was on hold for too long before you had me on this
Right.
segment, and you should be plugging my book, and that kind
Yeah.
of thing. So I mean, like, journalists as a whole are an odd class to deal with, and you deal with them a lot when you're a producer, because
Right.
you're in the weird role where you kind of have to be the good guy. Like
Yeah.
a producer who's just a straight up dick isn't.
Yeah, it's like
it's counterproductive. So
Right.
you got to be friendly, and there's this weird economy with producers where we're all doing favors for each other because we're all going to need favors at some point.
Right.
Like the people, there's this whole network behind the scenes of what people really see. That's kind of interesting, and it's where I've lived for like almost 6 years now.
Right. So that kind of plays into like your role on the Kirk Minihane show, which we probably have a lot of listener overlap. I have to imagine between us and the Kirk Minihane show. I'd say like 80%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's roll with it.
Or
Just
the-
for the sake of this podcast.
Cool.
I'm
Thanks.
just gonna agree
No,
with you.
Definitely. But anyways, how have you kind of like figured out your role on that show?
Well, I mean, still figuring it out,
Yeah,
obviously.
right.
I mean, there's a bunch of stuff behind the scenes that people don't see, because I'm kind of in a hybrid role because it's really just Kirk and I off in our own little world, doing a lot of sales, doing a lot of, logistical, like, business stuff for running.
Right.
I guess the mechanics, the less sexy stuff that you don't hear.
The
that
less
doesn't,
sexy
the less,
stuff?
Yeah, it's the unsexy stuff that doesn't make it onto the podcast. Like, I mean, over the weekend I'll be building some acoustic proofing. I'm going to be like shopping at Home Depot. This
Right.
is the glamorous
You're
role
telling
that
me
I
about
found
this before,
myself in.
yeah.
Little
So-
HGTV action.
yeah,
Ooh.
exactly. It's more like DIY YouTube. is
Yeah.
what I'm
Hell
gonna be
yeah.
doing. Like the nail goes where? But so there's that kind of stuff. But then the on-air stuff is really the only way to find it is through experience.
Right.
That's the only way to find it. And I found that it was the same thing with Howie, where I remember the first time I ever tried to talk on air, Howie looked at me like I was a fucking alien.
Yeah.
Like, what can this kid possibly contribute to the entertainment value of this show?
Right.
And then by the end of it, it was almost like a full-time sidekick, co-host type role.
Right,
It kind of grew because you get better at understanding what should be said and what shouldn't be said. But in this role, I mean, it's still very, very new. You're still kind of exploring, like, well, what are the differences between broadcast radio and a podcast?
That's true.
Because they're very real.
Do you
And
feel like it's like a proving yourself thing almost?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a new audience. There's a younger audience. I mean, let's face it. We've gone from conservative talk radio where the content and the format is pretty simple. Like, hold on a second. I'll pull up Judge Report and I'll tell
you're
you.
getting his
On his
phone.
phone. Classic
I'm on my
journalist.
phone.
Thinks
I'm
he's
gonna-
hot shit.
I'm gonna pull up the Judge Report and tell you
Right.
what we're talking about.
I told you,
All
you're
right, here's
above
the
me.
front page of the Judge Report. Jeff Epstein's madam has been spotted in New York City. So we're going to talk about the Epstein. Did he kill himself? I don't know. He had some broken bones in his neck. I think Hillary Clinton fucking strangled him to death. That's what I think. What are your theories? Call us right now, 1-800.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
So there's a formula where the news kind of dictates what you're doing, but what we're doing on the Kirk Minihane show is a lot different because the entire idea, and I can't even pretend to understand all of Kirk's idea for it.
Right, exactly.
Basically, as I've interpreted it, is we're doing a show unlike anything that's out there. We're not doing a news show. We're not doing a political show. We're not doing a cultural show. We're doing the Kirk Minihane show. And so it's like I'm learning what my role in it is as it's coming into being.
Right.
And it's been a wild experience.
Yeah,
it's fucking
for sure.
exciting. Every day is different.
Definitely don't know what to expect. And I because while they're recording, sometimes I'm in the other studio, but sometimes I'm just sitting out in the lounge doing work, and I feel like it's the classic where I won't hear for a while, and then I'll hear and then just and sometimes I'll look in. I feel like you have either one of two faces on, Steve. You'll either and obviously no one can see this, but you'll either just kind of be like chilling, just kind of listening intently, or you'll be this face of almost I don't know what's happening right now, but I am about to go the fuck off. You know what I mean? And
yeah, I think that's a little bit of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't see Kirk's face, but I wish that I could because he faces away from me.
Pretty soon we'll be having a live video product.
Oh, smart.
Yeah,
That's our next step.
We're one step at a time.
Yes.
Jim Foster, thanks for the recommendation.
Thanks, Jim. Shout out, Jim.
Shout out, Jim.
I think we've given Jim a shout out on every episode.
I hope so.
You got it.
I hope so.
Jim's been great.
Jim
and Sean, everybody's been awesome.
He's Kate's mentor.
Oh my God. He will deny that until his grave, though.
And that wraps up part one of our interview with Steve Robinson. He's the producer of the Kirk Minihane Show, which is a very, very popular show. Definitely much more popular than this podcast is. But we're coming. We're coming for that spot. We got a long way to go. But Kirk Minihane Show, go check it out. Really, really raunchy show. Be warned, it is very raunchy. It's not for everyone, but if it is for you, you'll definitely love it, as many people do. Very entertaining, and Steve is great. And this is kind of cool for me. Barstool is they're a controversial company, but they have some really good stuff. And the first podcasts I listened to were Barstool podcasts, and it's kind of half the reason that I got into podcasts in the first place. So really cool for me to actually be interviewing someone who works for Barstool and helps create some of that content. I'm just such an emotional guy. I just love all this stuff so much. Check out part 2 of the interview coming out next week. We got more talking with Steve, and Steve gives Kate some advice on her date. Kate went on a date. Go, Kate. Good for you. Be an adult. So be on the lookout for that later this week, and we'll see you guys then.